have a bias, I'll admit it. A majority of my films are shot statically on a tripod with minimal to no movement. Whenever I'm not working alone, you can see that I often do more movement in my stuff, sometimes a lot more. And a lot of the movement I do ends up getting the shitty warp stabilizer filter added in to smoothen it out. I'm trying to be transparent here. Movement in film isn't some inherently damning thing about film, and if you've got the money and the crew and the fucking crane, have at it. Some really incredible shots have come out of intricate composition. One of my favorite contemporary films and one of my least favorite classic films push moving shots to a phenomenal limit. Do not listen to a word I say, okay? I am bad at academia and I am even worse at understanding art. This is not a bit, it's a warning. Point being, there's no deeper measurement of quality between the use of a moving shot and a static one that isn't connected to a shot's intentions. Why this framing? Why this shot size? Why this angle? Why this focal length? Except, the answer to those questions, at least when it comes to contemporary works of the past 30 or so years, are kind of vapid, very technically driven, and not all that concerned with art. And it's from this haphazard answer that I think a lot of malice towards lockdown shots comes from. In late 2017, I lost my mind. I was too deep into film school, but not deep enough to actually really understand any of the things I was learning. I made a video called The Two Kinds of Subjectivity, where I invented two worlds in which subjective means two different things. The video is now private. I made it because there were some things in film school that were confusing me, and my way of getting ahead of it was trying to make it fit within my prior understanding of film. Learning about the psychology of film and how certain shots are meant to affect, an audience, and how screen direction is used, camera movement, and other stuff, like together with story and character. Motivated cinematography. My fucking white whale. I have never read Moby Dick. Here's some stuff on motivated cinematography that I found on the first page of Google, because reading is for nerds. It'd probably be a lot easier to just imagine an apology at the end of every sentence in this.
There are two types of camera movement, motivated and unmotivated. Motivated camera movements are the direct response to the action on screen. You move, I follow you. A character walks across the room and the camera tilts, pans, or physically moves by hand or on tracks.
When something in a film is motivated, whether it's the camera movement, the staging, the lighting, whatever, it not only responds to the actions occurring on screen, but it also exists to serve the story and push it forward.
Motivated movement is the ability to project inner thoughts, emotions, needs, and wants using the body in motion. It can also reveal something about the character's life and background. Movement is motivated from the viewpoint of the character, not the actor playing him.
All decent explanations. The definition that was closest to what I understood it to be was the second one. To me, motivated cinematography meant that everything in frame exists to serve the story and push it forward. The problem, I think, comes from how we define pushing a story forward. Those questions I asked earlier, why this focal length, why this angle, etc., are often answered first technically before anything. Well, a shot's height creates a power dynamic between an audience and what it's looking at. Following a character's movements and eye lines helps the audience keep track of what's on screen. The wider or closer the focal length, the more emphasis we're putting onto or taking away from a subject. As a result of this thought process, often in a lot of contemporary cinematography, you see these answers simplified in the finished works. Keep shots close for emphasis with shallow focus, move the camera often, we have to keep the story moving. Here's some digital zooming because if we're static for even a second, we're not effectively moving the story forward. And meanwhile, these aren't rules. They're a suggestive guideline. But the longer we frame this form of filmmaking as the proper procedure for good or even effective cinema, the less of a chance we have at doing more in the medium. And so, my personally modified guide to motivational filmmaking is this: to be motivated is to have intent. That's it. Because in truth, there aren't two kinds of subjectivity. There's one, and it isn't technical, it's personal. And at that, it's actually pretty far from what could be the most effective, if effective is what you're after. Now, I still want to push back on the technical explanations for what could make static wide shots effective. I think that using what's considered to be motivated cinematography and applying it to wide angles and emotionless cameras still devalues the use of that technique. In this context, these types of shots would use stillness to represent stagnancy in a narrative, let's say, and creating what I consider to be an almost flat one-to-one transition between what the camera is doing to what the story is doing.
That sucks, okay? That sucks so bad.
Film becomes a math problem this way. If the shot is wide, a cinephile would immediately assume that the intent behind the shot would be to allude to the size of a space, or to feel a character's loneliness in a location that they solely occupy. It's just very limiting. And it's not to say filmmakers don't often think this way when they shoot. I've done it too. It's just that you don't necessarily have to. There can be more to what the camera does than what the camera does. So what do I think is effective stillness? Well, it's committing to stillness. I often see contemporary or big budget films that sporadically use wide shots that could possibly be a bit more effective if they were on screen for longer. That's less of a problem with the shots themselves, which are often decently composed, and more of a problem with a director that sees these types of shots as risky to include in the edit for a longer stretch of time than the average of about 3 seconds, or even the still pretty short length of a small scene. Watching older films especially allows us a chance to see scenes that perfectly utilize wide-angled long takes with minimal to no movement throughout an entire film, and not just as a neat aesthetic trick to keep an audience paying attention. There can be a technical purpose to it, which there often is, but there's also a commitment to not relying on that movement to hold our hand through a film. Tracking shots are cool, and tracking oneers are very cool, but these techniques are often meant to call attention to themselves, as technical spectacle, as some kind of cinematic feat where, in the meantime, it's breaking its own rule and causing the audience to forget about the story at hand. I don't think I've ever made it through a stylized moving oneer in a film where at some point I didn't say, oh, fuck, they haven't cut yet. And meanwhile, in the rare films that use static oneers locked down on a tripod, we notice only what we want to notice. The camera is not feeding us information, it's allowing us to explore the frame. It's giving the story multiple meanings, and it's moving the story not only forward, but in any direction the viewer chooses. Static imagery creates a more nuanced art.
Holy shit. Why did I do that?
I read a lot about Roger Deakins and watched a lot of interviews with him in preparation for this video, because if there was one person I figured cinematography nerds online would maybe stop for a second to consider the opinion of, it'd be one of the best cinematographers. Well, Deakins doesn't necessarily agree with me, though he doesn't disagree either. He sees filmmaking as situational.
I don't think I have a naturalistic style. I hope I have a style that suits the project that I'm on. I mean, I walk on a film set on a new movie and I think it feels like I've never done it before, like I'm learning, you know? So I don't think I've got a style. Any way a film looks is a product of the prep on that look, on that film, and how that sort of developed as we've gone along.
He enjoys moving shots as a means of using a setting to its fullest, and his lockdown shots have an intent too, often used in dialogue and intimacy in those moments, or of space and of symmetry. His technical work is not always consistent, but what is consistent is how he sees cinematography as a means to experiment. And that's all I'm trying to promote here. A type of shot used only one way, scarcely for limiting reasons, is not fully utilizing the potential of the wide shot, and the past few decades have seen them used less and less in favor of supposed technical propriety. There's nothing proper about art unless that art is a product. And here, often of course, it is a product. The films we watch, even the good ones, sometimes even the really good ones, are created to be sold first and read second. And it's been going on for so long, the language itself of what is good or bad or useless or valuable to cinema are tied to what conventionally sells better. I'm just suggesting we break out of that we try and see filmmaking as an opportunity to create art that is as much of ourselves as we can make it to be. For those of you that this is strictly a job, please tell me to shut my stupid mouth up. I understand that as long as we're in a system in which money means survival, this type of filmmaking is never going to fully go away. This video is not directed at working filmmakers whose goal is to succeed in an industry or at the very least provide for themselves. It's directed at those that so often discuss film as a pure art form in YouTube movie reviews and podcasts and long tweet threads that misunderstand metaphor or reject history. These people often misconstrue art through the lens of that monetary machine, and can no longer parse the difference between the two. Static shots are being seen as inferior filmmaking because anyone can do them. It doesn't take full crews, camera operators, sometimes even large machines rigged to repeat camera movements multiple times to shoot statically. Forcing film to be an expensive and inaccessible medium for expression, to me, is irresponsible. Marketability isn't everything. It's unfortunately a lot, but it isn't everything. Make some films on a tripod like you used to when you were a preteen and didn't have the resources you might have now. And while you're doing that, really care about what you're doing. You might find that you've been a little cynical about something remarkably valid. Also, don't ever do like drone shots or helicopter shots. If I find out you did them, I will shove you in a locker. Thanks for watching.